Well, there's a quote by Edward Snowden, think of him whatever you will, but he said that saying you don't care about privacy because you have nothing to hide is like saying you don't care about free speech because you have nothing to say. And so if we all just kind of give up our privacy and say it's not important, I get convenient features and products out of it, so I'm fine with giving it up. It's kind of like the boiling frog metaphor. Like there's going to be a day that comes when we're going to around and maybe our government is doing something that we disagree with, or maybe we are now being oppressed, whether it's financially or politically. And we're going to say, hey, we should organize against this. But then they just turn off our communications. Then we can't organize. Then we might get thrown in jail, or we lose our job for saying something against the powers that be, against the establishment.
Welcome back, everybody. This is the Straight No Chaser podcast, the show where we talk about human freedom through money, technology, philosophy, and economics. Today's show is all about privacy. I'd like to start off just by reading an excerpt from a manifesto written by Eric Hughes, and it's called the Cypherpunk Manifesto. The opening lines go like this. Privacy is necessary for an open society in the electronic age. Privacy is not secrecy. A private matter is something one doesn't want the whole world to know, but a secret matter is something one doesn't want anyone to know about. Privacy is the power to selectively reveal oneself to the world. I think this is framed so fantastically well. Often people talk about privacy as though it is some kind of secret thing, the usual story, well, if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. And this conversation with my friend Jordan, we go into the issue of privacy, why it is important. We talk about some of the possible attacks that we are facing on privacy in the modern world, and what you and I can do about it to just keep your information a bit closer to your chest, and you can decide how much you want to selectively reveal to the world. It's a great chat. I know you guys will enjoy it. Jordan, good to see you, my friend. Welcome back. I think it's been not quite a year since we last spoke, but getting close to that. And good to have you on the show. Welcome.
Thanks for having me back.
So the topic that we always love to talk about is privacy, the idea of privacy, things that you can do to improve your privacy. But before we talk about that, maybe you could just tell the audience, what is it? Like, what does privacy actually mean? Why is it important? And why is it an increasingly hot topic I see on social media these days? So just from your point of view, talk to us about privacy and the importance of it.
Yeah, I think privacy is a part of a broader topic that I like to call sovereign computing. I didn't come up with that name, but I think it's a good name. It captures an umbrella of using technology in a way that works in your interests, if you, the user, and not the interests of some other company or organization or government. So typically, I think of technology that's not trying to censor me or surveil me, and not trying to take my energy and monetize it for somebody else's benefit. And so privacy is a big part of that, because if I am being surveilled the whole time, well, first of all, even if it's just, quote unquote, just for monetization, that's still terrible. I don't want my personal life to be used as a training data for some AI company that's going to make a ton of money on it, or even if it's just for advertisements. We've all had that creepy feeling of we say something to somebody we're talking to in person, we're having a conversation with our loved one or friend, and then suddenly we're getting Instagram ads or Facebook ads for it, and we never typed it in. So it's that kind of stuff that's really, it's a gross feeling to know that you're being recorded. And you could just extend that to all of our communications. There's an analogy where if I'm talking to my wife, let's say, and we're messaging each other on some typical surveilled tech app, this could be WhatsApp, or it could be whatever, pick your favorite messaging app that's not private. It's as if I am saying to my partner in life, the person who I confide my secrets in and we share everything. It's as if I'm grabbing some employee from a giant tech company, international tech company, and saying, whispering my secret into that person's ear and having them go over and give it to my wife. And by the way, they are typing it into a database and sharing it with the rest of the company so that it can be monetized. Now, of course, that's not literally what happens. That's not how it works. You don't have to have a person typing it in, but it just paints a picture of how invasive it is and how unnatural it is. And this is not how we've lived our lives up until this point in history. And we would all be kind of appalled if we saw that happening in front of our eyes. But because it's happening behind the scenes, most of us don't really think about it. And so what I've started to learn over the past few years and really become passionate about is, can we use our technology in a way that isn't like that serves us, that does what we expect it to do and nothing else, that isn't doing nefarious things without our permission. And what I've increasingly found is that, yes, it is possible. We don't have to be a Luddite living in a cabin in the woods with no electricity and no internet. We can actually use 99.9% of all of the modern cutting edge conveniences that allow us to be hyper productive and communicate with people all around the world. So that's the main motivation behind my interest in all of this.
So would you say that the problem started with the advent of the big social media tech companies, or was this something that was coming in before that? From my point of view, I think I'm probably only aware of sort of Facebook suddenly appeared on the scene, and it was this great sort of new, shiny new thing, a bit of a convenience toy. People played a few games, they would share pictures. They would sort of go to some restaurant and say, hey, I've arrived at this restaurant, I'm checking in. And, it was this sort of fun, gamified sort of experience where you would become the mayor of a certain area if you clicked in X number of times in a week. And it seemed to be a fantastic way to connect people. Is this, do you think, where it started, or was it starting before then?
Well, so it wasn't just with Facebook, for example. I mean, Google, if you do a little bit of research on the origins of Google, it's very nefarious in terms of the circumstances in which Google was founded. So as soon as they started becoming widely used, they got into bed with the intelligence community in the US, so the NSA, the CIA. And so this sounds like crazy conspiracy stuff, but there are popular books written on this topic. It's not a big secret anymore. And so you have like the surveillance apparatus of the United States government working hand in hand with companies like Google and then later Facebook and these other ones. So that's one aspect of it, because they just have such a massive capability to capture data, unprecedented in human history because of the internet. And the other factor is, so you had a little bit of that first factor is government intelligence agencies, and there's motivation there because they're kind of coerced into it. Hey, work with the government, do your duty, be patriotic. The other factor is it's just a sheer monetization scheme. And so the incentives line up such that it is profitable to harvest people's data, to collect as much as possible, and to use it for advertising purposes, tracking purposes. The more that they can track you, the more that they can identify you, the more that they can charge for advertisements. And so these companies, Google, Facebook, etc., there's a reason why this model of the consumer not paying anything to use their product became so popular. And it's because, as you've heard the saying, if you are not paying for the product, you are the product. So we all, as consumers and users of these companies, of Google, I go to the Google homepage and I've never paid a dime to Google in my life for using their search engine. you go to Facebook and you've never paid a dime to Facebook in your life for using Facebook. And that just became the standard model in Silicon Valley and other parts that have adopted this. And that's because there's somebody that is paying them, right? They didn't become trillion-dollar companies by just giving stuff away for free. They are being paid by advertisers. And so that's their whole model. So we are being harvested to generate a product for somebody else that they're paying for. So I hope that answers your question, but there might be roots that go back further. Originally, the internet consisted of a more decentralized set of nodes. You had blog sites and message boards and email servers. And then even when the World Wide Web started with web pages, it was still very decentralized. It wasn't until the era of the walled garden model that it really took off, the centralization and the surveillance. So first you had AOL. They were probably one of the big walled garden efforts in the early days. And then they kind of fell by the wayside, and you had Facebook sort of reinvent that model and take it to a whole new level.
Yeah, so I suppose the message there is no such thing as a free lunch. When these shiny new things came along, as you rightly say, it didn't cost you anything to use them, and it was kind of fun to do. I think I certainly didn't see anything wrong with it. It just seemed to be great. So what do you say to the person that says, I actually quite like the fact that I'm talking to my friends about something and tomorrow I get some ads on it. It's so convenient. I never have to worry about anything. If I just, I lose my phone, I just type in, I just log back in and all my stuff is back. And this is brilliant. Someone that has got zero interest or they don't see the harm in it. They just see the positive side.
Well, there's a quote by Edward Snowden, think of him whatever you will, but he said that saying you don't care about privacy because you have nothing to hide is like saying you don't care about free speech because you have nothing to say. And so if we all just kind of give up our privacy and say it's not important, I get convenient features and products out of it, so I'm fine with giving it up. It's kind of like the boiling frog metaphor. Like there's going to be a day that comes when we're going to around and maybe our government is doing something that we disagree with, or maybe we are now being oppressed, whether it's financially or politically. And we're going to say, hey, we should organize against this. But then they just turn off our communications. Then we can't organize. Then we might get thrown in jail, or we lose our job for saying something against the powers that be, against the establishment. So the ability for us to have communications that are not censored and not surveilled is, I think, key to a free population. It's as important as freedom of speech, because in this modern age, if the government protected freedom of speech, let's say that it was perfectly effective, that the idea of freedom of speech was founded in an era before this kind of technology. So I have the ability to go out and maybe be a town crier on the corner of my street, but that doesn't really have an effect in our modern age. We need to be able to communicate digitally across the internet. And if I'm prevented from doing that, I've essentially been silenced. So the ability to silence dissident voices, even if it's people that we disagree with, it's kind of like the free speech thing. Free speech is meant to protect not just speech we care about, or not just speech we agree with, but speech we disagree with. And the reason is because one day what we say might be the disagreeable thing, and we want that to be protected. So similarly, we want our privacy, digital privacy, to be protected, because one day we might be counting on it for our survival or for our freedom.
Yeah, 100%. I had a conversation with a friend of mine the other day, and I was actually talking to her about the show. And I said, hey, you should come onto the show. I'd love to chat to you. She's a formally educated financial person. And she sort of said, well, she wants to get a bit more experience first. Maybe in 10 years, she would feel more comfortable coming on to the podcast and talking. And I said to her, but, people grow and develop all the time. and your ideas should be changing all the time. Not every idea will change, but there's going to be a lot of stuff that you hear about today. You may agree with it, and then in a year or two, or maybe 5 years, you sort of hear another side of the argument, and you might change your opinion. So I try to encourage her and just say, look, it's what you say is not going to be cast in stone. It's not like you have to have reach this level of the truth now before you can come onto a podcast and talk. You can just come on and tell me what you think, and I'd be really interested to hear it. But it got me thinking about this thing where I think everybody has experienced a changing of their mind on some matter or another. And it's actually a good sign. If you never change your mind about anything, you're actually just not growing. You're not communicating. You're not thinking. There's no critical thought going into anything. So I find that's really, really interesting, the whole thing about free speech. As you clearly said, that if you don't think it's worth protecting, you haven't really had anything to say, or you haven't really thought about what is being said, because you may very well change your mind and then suddenly you're the bad person. COVID, I think, seemed to be a magnifier on this problem. I know there was a lot of what was the word? Deplatforming, people losing their jobs, and really smart people being criticized for what they said, and quite qualified people who disagreed with areas in their field were sort of losing their jobs or being ostracized. What did you think of the COVID thing? Was that like an awakening moment that where the normal person in the street got a chance to actually go, hang on a second, this is not normal?
Yeah, I mean, COVID's a huge topic, right? We could do hours on that, but so I'll scope it specifically to what I learned, or what I started to discover about privacy and big tech and technology during that period. And it's exactly like you mentioned, people who were simply raising questions that later were completely validated as correct, right? It turned out a lot of the things that the government or the popular culture or just the media in general got wrong, and then later did a complete 180 on. But the people who had been sounding the alarm early, the few dissident voices, were completely silenced. They were canceled, they were deplatformed, whatever all the terms are. Some of them were debanked. They were fired from their jobs if they had one. They were prevented from basically participating in society. And I noticed that you saw after COVID as well, and all of this censorship stuff happening, that there was a backlash in terms of people starting to create alternative tech platforms, because at that time, everybody just thought, oh, why wouldn't I just use Google, YouTube, Facebook Messenger, et cetera, et cetera. But people were getting kicked off of these things. And so you had like the recognition for alternative platforms. And I think that was a good wake up moment for myself and for many people. And the good news is that nowadays it's only gotten better. There are great options you can do all of your computing in a much more sovereign way. You don't have to use these big tech platforms. You can do things in a way that allows you to retain control of your data, allows you to stay private, and prevents you from being censored as well if there's ever another event like COVID or something similar.
Okay.
There's one more thing I wanted to add. So you mentioned that people change their opinions, and I 100% agree with that. But there's another reason. Even if you personally are not changing your opinion, there are many people who have experienced this over the past 10 years, let's say, or 15, where their opinion has not changed, but the zeitgeist, the popular opinion, has changed. The Overton window has shifted in terms of it was allowable to think X, and you still think X, but now X is abhorrent and you are a bad person for thinking X because you're supposed to think Y. And so think about a scenario like that where your ideas have not changed. You still are thinking what you consider to be the right, the true, the good thing, but now you are going to be canceled for that. So that's another reason why you might want to have more control over your technology.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I think that's very often overlooked. So I'm glad you mentioned that. Thanks very much. Fantastic point there. So, Jordan, just to let's take a look in, say, the past year, the last since the last time we spoke to now. Have there been changes in this space, in the privacy space? And if so, has there been anything notable in the past year? Good or bad, I might add.
Yeah. So the first thing I want to talk about is or update everybody on is I'm a big fan of GrapheneOS, which for those who don't know is a de-Googled Android that you can use on the Google Pixel phones. Unfortunately, you might have noticed in that sentence there, I said that in order to de-Google, you have to use a Google Pixel phone. And there are good technical reasons for why GrapheneOS only works on Google Pixel devices. They're very secure. But from a marketing standpoint or from a persuasion standpoint, it's a bad look to have to say, oh, yeah, you want to get Google out of your life. Here, use this Google phone. So there is good news on that front, though. Is GrapheneOS, the project, has announced that they have partnered with a major phone manufacturer, and that in the Q4 of 2026 or possibly early 2027, they're going to be releasing this phone with GrapheneOS preloaded on it and fully supported, so that you no longer can only use GrapheneOS on a Pixel. So that's really exciting. They said that it's going to be a top of the line flagship quality phone, so you're not stuck with some, lower tier phone. I'm definitely going to be trying that out, even though I have GrapheneOS right now on a Pixel 9, which works great, does everything I need it to. I have zero complaints. I just think it's great for the privacy space to have another option for their phone. So I'll be trying that out as soon as it comes out. And maybe by the next time we chat, I'll have more to update on that. So that's one thing. I've got a couple more updates I want to give, but before I do, anything you want to add there?
Yeah, so graphene super interesting. I've read a lot about it. I have not yet gotten my hands on it to mess around with, and so I'm looking forward to doing that. But as you say, there's only one phone manufacturer in the world that produces the phone that supports the operating system, and I kind of thought, is this not just an easy way to kill the project? If Google just decided they're locking it down, you're not going to be able to. I'm assuming you sideload the thing or something. It's not probably a standard install, but if there's only one phone in the world that can handle it, and the powers that be decide to just crush it, it almost looks like too easy for them to do it. So great news that they're coming out, that the OS designers are coming out with a handset as well. That's fantastic. And I hope Google continue to support it on the Pixel, and maybe more options will come out. I think it's great.
Yeah, exactly like you said. It's a single point of failure, and Google has been the impetus for them to find another manufacturer was exactly what you talked about. Google has been slowly making it more and more difficult for open source projects like GrapheneOS to develop by dragging their feet in terms of releasing the code. So that's exactly what's going on there. But it'll be great to have another option.
Yeah, for sure, man. What were the other things you wanted to cover?
Yeah, so in the AI space, this is probably one of the fastest moving areas of tech, which is LLMs and other generative AI. And I'm a software engineer by day. And in the past year, we have fully adopted using LLM coding agents in our day-to-day work. And so they're enormously productive, productivity multipliers. And this is changing computing. This is not news to anybody who's been following the space. But a lot of people don't think about the privacy implications, because obviously when we are using a third party company, whether it's OpenAI's ChatGPT, Google's Gemini, or Anthropic's Claude, every time you type something into that, it's sending that data to the company so that they can process it on their machines and then sending the result back to you. And this is obviously a problem if you want to retain control and privacy of your data. So the good news is that the open source LLM space is also evolving very rapidly. And there are a lot of options for using LLMs in a more private way. The best option, if you can afford it, is to set up your own computer with a high powered GPU, which costs thousands of dollars these days. And then you can LLM on that, and you can basically use it as the way you are using a third party company, but it's your own server and it's running in your house. That is not an option for everybody, including myself. I don't have the money to spend on that sitting around these days. So there are some good middle grounds. One of them off the top of my head is Venice.ai. And that is a service that allows you to use LLMs in a more private fashion. There's kind of two options that they have there. One approach is they simply act as an anonymity layer between them and one of these big company third-party providers that we just mentioned. So you still get the high quality output of these cutting edge LLMs from the big companies, but you are anonymized, right? You don't have your account that's tied to you with your IP address. So that's a good anonymity layer, adds a lot, and it's very easy to use. You get the same user experience. The other company that I can think of that offers a good privacy option is called Maple. Their URL is trymaple.ai. By the way, I'm not affiliated with any of these companies. I just use them and like them. So that offers something similar. You can select your model, you can select your provider, and you get that anonymity layer. However, both of these services also have open source models, which is cool because you as a person who doesn't want to spend a ton of money on running your own hardware, they are doing it for you. And so this is a lot more private because it's running in the case of Maple especially, they use something called a trusted execution environment. That's a technical term, a TEE. And it's a type of cryptographic server where it's running specialized hardware that actually encrypts it locally and prevents tampering. So you get an extra layer of protection there and security and privacy. So those are a couple of good options for running LLMs in a more private manner. And then for those of you who do coding, there's something called open code, which is like Claude Code, but it allows you to plug in any model provider. And so you can also use these two providers that I just mentioned.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the AI thing because there was one of my notes I wanted to ask you about as well. Everybody's using AI, and it's reminding me of the shiny new thing that Facebook and all these other social media platforms were whenever it was 10, 15 years, or 15 years ago, or 20 years ago, in fact. And I was just wondering if the same issue is going to happen now, because everybody seems to use them. And I think the difference between the LLMs and like social media is the LLMs can be used for everything and anything. So people, I'm sure, are using them for a wide variety of tasks. It's not just posting a photo or saying, hey, I'm in Switzerland on a ski trip. You're starting to ask questions. How do I do this? How do I do that? I've got this problem. Oh, here's a photo of my x-ray. What do you think? Do I need surgery or do I need to see a doctor? So people can be almost giving up way more of their personal information into the shiny new toy and not really thinking about what could happen to it. I know one of the things that popped up on my radar was something called OpenClaw. And I think it might be connected to, I think it was part of a fork of Claude or something, where people were trying to use Claude as a local AI agent on your device, on your laptop or your desktop PC. I think it went through a few name changes. There were some complaints about trademark infringement or something like that. But the long and the short of it is you can now download these autonomous AI agents onto your device. Have you looked at this? Have you tried it? And what do you think about doing something like this?
Yeah. And one more thing before I get into OpenClaw, which is these. So ChatGPT, which is OpenAI's product. The ex-NSA director, that's the National Security Agency of the United States, is now on the board of OpenAI. So it's this direct surveillance pipeline. If that doesn't tell you what you need to know, I mean, you should assume that every single thing that you send to these companies is being kept, tracked, and collated and sorted and used for all kinds of purposes. So definitely keep that in mind when you're using these products. But to have a truly more private experience, you would need to use one of those options we talked about earlier. What OpenClaw is like you said, it's an open source, similar. It started out similar to Claude Code, but it does something a little bit different. It has the agent tooling. The agent tooling, for those who don't know, is it is simply allowing LLMs to not just spit out text and talk to you like in a chat, but allows them to actually tell your computer to take actions. So like it can open up a program, it can, navigate in a web browser, it can send an email, these kinds of things. That's what an agent does. And so what OpenClaw does is it's an agent that it can run multiple agents that can operate your entire computer, and it's all powered by an LLM. Now, it's important to recognize that when you are using OpenClaw, the agent is running on your computer, but it's still making API calls to a third-party LLM provider, such as OpenAI or Google or Anthropic for Claude, et cetera. So you're not getting any kind of privacy benefit there. What the real unlock of OpenClaw is that it's just more capable of running your computer. If you want to use OpenClaw in a more private manner, you can. You just have to make sure you're using a private LLM provider or running that LLM locally instead of using one of these big tech providers.
Okay, that sort of makes sense. Is there any concern about other privacy leakage using this type of agent? So, for example, I tell it to send an email, and it's got to open up the email, find an attachment, attach the attachment to the email, and send it off. Now, if I keep passwords, for example, on an Excel spreadsheet. Now, I know, don't let your hair fall out. I don't do that. But I think some people might be keeping passwords on an Excel spreadsheet. Is there a chance that sensitive information on your computer can be accessed and sent off?
100%. It's not just a chance. It's a very high probability. This is very cutting edge stuff. So if right now, as we're talking about this in February of 2026, things are evolving very quickly. But if you go look up any tutorial on how to set up OpenClaw, one of the big topics that you're going to have to cover is security. And people who are programmers or system administrators professionally have known about this for a long time because this is what they do for a living. But it is very challenging to keep a computer secure, one that has the ability to reach out to the internet and has the ability for the internet to reach into it. So the whole skill of keeping a server secure is one that has been honed over decades. And so if you're setting up OpenClaw, you're kind of having to get a crash course in computer security. What most people who are using OpenClaw right now do in order to help mitigate this possible security breach for themselves is they're not giving it access to their own personal email and contact book and that kind of stuff. What they're doing instead is spinning up separate accounts for it. So like if you are using Google Calendar in your personal life and your Gmail, which I don't recommend, by the way, there are plenty of good alternatives, but let's just say for the sake of argument, you're using that. You would then, if you want to start up OpenClaw, you would create a separate Google account specifically for OpenClaw with its own calendar and stuff. That way, if somebody hacks into it, they're not going to get access and be able to completely destroy your life, getting into all of your files and communicating with your contact list. So that's what I would recommend for people who are getting into OpenClaw, trying it out. But do your research on the security of it. It is very important.
Cool. Thanks for that. One of the things I've noticed that has been popping up in my socials recently is this age verification push by various governments and institutions and tech companies. And I suspect it's coming more from the governments, the bureaucracy, than it is from the tech companies. But governments wanting to verify age of users of specific software or access to certain sites, which on the surface of it sounds okay, fine. I don't want my 12-year-old child, running into a porn site by accident, is the obvious one. But on the other hand, that means every single person on the planet has to do some sort of facial ID identification to be able to access the website. So it seems like it's not very clever, it's quite obvious, but in laying out the protect the children, these companies are now actually forcing everybody to give address, social security number or ID, facial recognition, all this sort of stuff, just to utilize the service. Have you noticed this on your side? And is this something to be concerned about?
It is something to be concerned about. I've heard a lot about this going on in the United Kingdom in particular, not so much in the US, although we are seeing recently the company Discord, which makes the chat platform, they announced that they're going to require age verification and ID verification. And the response, at least the response from me and people who think similarly to me, is absolutely not. I'm going to find an alternative. So if I was using Discord before and and now I'm required to submit my ID to use it going forward, I'm simply going to move to another platform, find an alternative, because to me, that's unacceptable. The argument of this is for saving the children, this is by now we should all be wise to this argument, right? They use think of the children argument to push any authoritarian action that they want. I mean, this has been going on since probably before you and I were even around, right? This argument has probably been used since the dawn of time. You talk about the safety of the children, these people that don't have the ability to protect themselves, and you say, because of possible threats to them, we are going to reduce the freedom for everybody else. I have children. I'm a fairly recent father, and I, of course, don't want them to be seen running into any terrible stuff on the internet. But that's my responsibility as a parent, right? No matter what the laws are, first of all, it won't save them. If you are not paying attention to your kids' lives, they're going to find objectionable stuff that you don't want them to find. So no law is going to prevent that. And secondly, that law is then going to make life worse for everybody by just implementing these draconian measures, reducing freedom, all in the name of a little bit of security. And there's the famous Ben Franklin quote that I might be butchering, but it's those who trade off a little bit of freedom or liberty for security are going to receive neither. So I think that's true in this case as well.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, one of the things I wanted to ask you, and you've mentioned it at least twice in the conversation today, is more and more tools are coming up, and there are more and more platforms and other tools to use. Do you want to sort of talk through some of those tools as alternatives to sort of the big tech that we use today?
Yes. For those who don't know what self-hosting is a superpower once you've learned about it and figured it out. Self-hosting simply means that you are running on your own computer what you previously might have used some company's computer for. So instead of using iCloud or Google Docs to have all of your Office documents on, you're running it on a computer that sits maybe in your living room, and it's running something like Nextcloud, which is a free and open source Office suite that's a complete replacement for the Microsoft Office or the Google Docs or that kind of thing. So And I could just go down the list and tick off every single thing that you're using in your life that's running on some company's servers. You can replace with something that's running on your own. And there's also a middle ground. Even if you, let's say, haven't gotten around to trying it out, because it does take a little bit of time to change up your workflow, right? So there are some companies that are better than others. Even if they're running on a third-party server, they are at least better in two ways. One is that they are run by a company who's putting privacy forward as their main product. They're saying, we're staking our entire reputation on this. We're going to devote our efforts to making a private product. We are not competing with the Googles of the world on simple features, right? It's going to have the same features. Don't worry. It's going to work just as well, but it's going to actually be private instead of Google's option, let's say. The other thing that they do is they actually engineer it in a way that it makes it so they can't do nefarious things with your data. And the main technique there is called end-to-end encryption, which is simply a way of saying that every device that you use, it's encrypted locally on that device before it's off to the company's servers. So the company is unable to access your data, even if they wanted to, which is great, because then if they're compelled to by a government agency, let's say, they can't. We saw a great example of this when over the years, Signal, the Signal messaging app, they are really good about publishing on their website, on their blog, anytime that they receive an order from a law enforcement agency like the FBI to go after one of their users, they are legally compelled to comply and give up all the data that they have on a user. And they say, sure, here you go. And here's exactly what we have on this user. And it's simply like the last time that this user logged on or like used the app and the phone number that was used to register it. That's it. They don't have the contents of it. They don't have any metadata about who they're talking to. So that's great. I mean, every company should be operating like that. In my opinion, it's better to not have that data as a liability. But I'm not thinking like a Silicon Valley data gobbling VC.
Yeah. So you mentioned Nextcloud as a self-hosting solution. You also mentioned companies like third-party companies that make privacy part of basically they're selling privacy, I suppose you could say. So you mentioned Signal. Are there any other companies, third-party companies, that you would be able to suggest that people take a look at if they wanted to move away from the Googles and the Apples of this world?
Yes, Proton is a great company that provides privacy as their selling point, and they are intending to replace things like Gmail, Google Drive, that kind of thing, Calendar. So that's a great option. There are a whole bunch. We could do hours on this, but I would recommend people check out the Sovereign Computing Show, which is a podcast I have. It is currently on pause because of I have a new baby, so I've been busy. But don't let that stop you from listening, because the episodes are still less than a year old and they are all very relevant. All the recommendations in them are very useful, and we cover everything from how you could replace your entire tech stack with more private and sovereign options.
Cool. So talking about some of the new tech stuff, we mentioned, well, I get the feeling that from a privacy point of view, we seem to be losing the battle in terms of regulation. I think regulation seems to be anti-privacy and it's becoming more and more onerous. I don't know if you agree on that. That just seems to be a perception that I have. And this age verification is sort of one of them, and companies demanding access to your communication, maybe another example. So it seems to be governments are pushing harder against the privacy thing. But then on the other hand, the freedom tech seems to be pushing right on back. And I just made a note of a couple of, in fact, three that just sort of came to mind. BitChat, which is a new texting communication tool. I think it's Jack Dorsey from Twitter fame, originally one of the founders of Twitter. His company is behind that. And I saw an update the other day to say that they now include visual and like audio and pictures are now able to be transmitted via BitChat. I think the nice thing about BitChat is it's a Bluetooth, and it now also operates on MeshNet as well. So if you have those Meshtastic units dotted around, you can communicate on that. There was the one, Noster, which is sort of a decentralized, uncensorable sort of social media platform. It's in its infancy, but it's certainly getting busier and busier all the time, and the user experience is improving. And then, of course, we have the mighty Bitcoin, which is uncensorable money. So yeah, those are just three things that I think have really, I mean, Bitcoin's been around for a while, and so is Noster, but I think the point is that as governments crack down harder, freedom-loving individuals are finding ways to push back. Is there any sort of freedom, what you would call freedom tech, I suppose, that has popped up in the last year, or you think has really developed nicely in the last year that's worth mentioning?
Well, all of those things you mentioned are great. I use Noster, I use Bitcoin, I use what was the other one?
BitChat.
BitChat, yeah, I've used BitChat. These are great options, and I think the way you characterized it, I would agree with, which is that despite you have companies and maybe not so much companies, but governments that want to surveil and encroach on our privacy, you have the technology side. People are innovating in a way that's pushing back. It's there's the old "Don't tread on me" slogan. Well, this is "Can't tread on me," which is like we're designing it in a way that you can't surveil it, you can't censor it. Like Bitcoin is uncensorable. So I think there's a lot of great solutions that are born of the technology space where we're saying it's kind of designing in parallel. It's saying, okay, yeah, you make your laws and regulations, and we're just going to design over here and make things that are separate from your whole system. So now that being said, I can't think of anything in that exact milieu that I've used recently, but there is one more piece of technology I'd like to add, which is it kind of goes hand in hand with the LLM stuff we were talking about, and that is speech to text. AI powered speech to text. There are plenty of companies that will do this. For a price, you send it off to them, and it transcribes it and sends it back to your computer. But I found a couple of good open source, local first, private options. One of them is called Whispering, and the other is Voca Linux. And that second one is just for Linux, but Whispering is for all platforms, Mac, Linux, and Windows. And this is really handy when you pair it with AI, with LLMs, so that you have, for example, instead of having to type everything into your LLM chat box or code editor, you simply speak it, and it's just going to print out all the text. And I've seen people being really productive with this. I mean, you can have 5 different windows or chat boxes open at once, because each task takes a little bit time for it to process, right? So you say, okay, do thing A here, and then you switch to the next box and you say, you talk into your microphone, do thing B, and you switch and you go down, you set up like 5 of them going at once. By the time you get to the 5th one and you finish, the first one might be done with its task, and you can just be incredibly productive. So Whispering is, I would recommend everybody check that out. If you pair that with LLMs as well, you're going to be very impressed.
So you said a word there that got my ears pricked up, and that was Linux. Just to update you a little bit on my journey down this privacy road since we last spoke, I have set up a home server, and I'm busy experimenting with that and backing up all my photos to my local server, so it's not going up to the big tech guys. And I've separated my work stuff from my personal stuff, and I've got all those files going through as well. But one of the things that I looked at doing was replacing the operating system on my laptop. And in the past, I had messed around with Linux a little bit, but I was kind of a bit daunted. To install a program, sometimes you had to use a command line interface or something, and I'm not used to that. I'm an old guy now, so old dog, new tricks, all that sort of thing. But in December, I decided to grow a pair of balls, and I just downloaded Ubuntu, I think, and just dumped it on my laptop. Cheers, Windows. And I got to tell you, every time I switch my laptop on, it just puts a smile on my face. Absolutely loving it. But is Linux a more secure platform, or is it just that there's less bloatware or junk on it? What's your view on Linux?
Well, security has a very specific meaning in the tech world. It's distinct from privacy. So you can have something that's very secure, but not private at all. An example would be Google. Google has tens of thousands of engineers that are paid a lot of money to make things very secure. So that means that a bad actor, like an external hacker, they are going to have a tough time breaking in. However, it is not private. And by that, I mean, the individual user cannot expect their data to only be seen by themselves. It's going to be seen by many people at the company, third-party advertisers. In other words, people who are authorized to see the data can still see it. And Google authorizes a lot of people to see your data. It's just that people who are unauthorized to see it cannot see it, which is good, but it's not enough. You want both security and privacy. So if you're using Mac OS, for example, I know you said Windows, but let's talk about Mac OS for a second. Mac OS is a very secure operating system. And so if you're using it, you can have a reasonable expectation that you're not going to get hacked by some Chinese hacker or something like that. However, it is completely controlled by Apple. And so you have no reasonable expectation of privacy from Apple. Windows, on the other hand, is just complete and utter spyware. I mean, at this point, it is, and the number of security vulnerabilities that are constantly found in Windows is atrociously high. So you kind of don't have an expectation of either privacy nor security on Windows. So congrats to you for making the jump to Linux. What you said, I totally agree with. Whenever I'm using my devices with Linux or other private OSs on them, it's a good feeling knowing that what I'm doing is only being seen by me and anybody that I explicitly send it to. Nobody else. I don't have to worry about, well, should I censor myself here? Should I watch what I say? Because I don't have to worry about that. So it's a great feeling. I'm glad to hear you've jumped on board the Linux train, and hope it goes well for you. And as a Linux geek, I can talk about this for hours. So if you ever have any questions about it or just want some advice, feel free to message me anytime.
I certainly will. I've bumped into something called the year of the Linux laptop. It seemed to be going around. It's probably been going around for 20 years, frankly. But, my phone is listening. My phone is listening. So I was on Twitter and this thing popped up. And every time I see it, I give it a like and a repost. Just a little bit of more power to you. So there's just a little bit of fun on my side. Jordan, we're coming up on time. I do just want to ask you one final question. For people that are listening to all of this and saying, okay, I hear what you're saying, but this sounds super complicated. Can you just give one easy win for a normal person to just move them in the right step or direction? Obviously, you mentioned your own show, Sovereign Computing, and I'll put the links in the show notes on that. I've listened to pretty much all your episodes and I highly recommend it. But just someone listening to the show, what is a small, quick win for them?
I would say if you don't already have a password manager and you're using it for all of your login info, you need to start doing that. I know it sounds like a hassle, but once you've made the switch, it'll actually make your life easier. And by getting a handle on all of your logins and your credentials, it's going to give you a huge step towards personal sovereignty with your data. Because once you do that, you can then start to control your passwords, your logins. You can see how many accounts you have. And people who aren't using one of these tools just kind of have ad hoc system where they're saying, oh, I'm going to write it on a notebook or a sticky note, or I'll remember it or something like that. And it's just not a great approach. So if you're not already using one, use a password manager. If you're wondering which one to use, my favorite is Bitwarden, because you can start out using the hosted service. And then in the future, if you ever want to, you can move to your own self-hosted option. If you're saying to yourself or to me right now, but I already do that, give me another tip. The next thing I would say is try Proton and the suite of products that they offer. So maybe instead of using Gmail or Apple Mail, you could use Proton Mail, and then there are other products that are similarly, they can replace your Apple and Google stuff.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for that. Any closing comments or thoughts from your side?
No, but thanks for having me on, and it was a pleasure talking to you.
Awesome, man. Always good to talk. I'll certainly put all that in the show notes, and nice to see you again. And looking forward to chatting and seeing what amazing new stuff has come up. Probably in a year from now. Maybe we'll talk sooner, but always good to talk. I learned so much. I really appreciate your time. Thanks, Jordan.
Thanks a lot.
Cheers.